you know, like just the want to try to survive, just our baser instincts of survival, I think is another factor in it, because you know, everything in our brain as far as instinct goes is geared towards surviving. Like that's the point of it all. So I think that, you know, developing this concept of, oh, well, we just go to someplace else after we die or something like that is a way for the brain to like rationalize death in a way that it doesn't seem so scary. And so I think it's just sort of like a survival thing.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Polytheistic religions say that maybe we're reincarnated and we come back as something else. Monotheistic religions talk about maybe we go on to paradise, or we go into eternal punishment, depending on what we did with this life. But the question is, where are we going? Is every worldview in religion has some sort of an answer to it.
Every worldview? Is every worldview necessarily has to have an answer to that?
I don't think so. I think just from his limited perspective, you know, I think he's just thinking about, you know, his worldview and the other Christian denominations' worldviews.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah. I think that he's more or less just comparing like to other comparable religions rather than actual worldviews. Like, I think Christianity has its own kind of worldview associated with it, but I mean, I don't think that I don't think that's a necessary necessity of a worldview. Like, for it to be a worldview, it doesn't have to answer these certain questions. It's just, you know.
Yeah.
I think that he's confusing worldview with like religion.
Or maybe he was just trying to say religion, but then realized atheism isn't a religion, so we'll just add worldview in there. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that he maybe that.
And so here's what we're going to do with the atheist worldview is we're going to go through and we're going to try to see the answers to these questions as much as we know how.
Ooh.
From quotes from atheists. Now, I'm just going to give a warning from the get-go. There are many diverse opinions. There are many diverse types of thinking when it comes to atheism. So it's not one size fits all, but in the same sense, there are very, very outspoken atheist thinkers that many people accept as being a good spokesperson for the movement in general. So just a warning, if you're an atheist...
Okay, so that's kind of what I thought. And, like I said, this guy seems much fairer than some other preachers actually saying, like, oh, well, yeah. Sorry.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I don't accept the whole idea that there are outspoken atheists who represent the movement. Like, sure, there are outspoken atheists, but like none of them speak for me. Not a single one of them. There is not a single one that I agree with everything, and they don't speak for me. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't agree with that necessarily. Like, I don't think we have leaders. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, but I was under the impression that what he was getting at is that within those sorts of outspoken people, there are lots of things that they have in common, especially their ideas of like science and all of that sort of stuff. Like the stuff that they do agree on.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
I think that's probably true, yeah.
Here, I'm not saying that every atheist thinks like this. What I am saying, though, are these are popular atheist writers and thinkers, and so I would say they give a fair representation. So if you don't think so, we can talk about it afterwards. So anyway, so this big question of origin. Where did we come from? Right? And essentially, when we ask this question, where did we come from, this is what we're asking. How did life begin?
Well, you see, when a mommy and a daddy, they love each other very much, and they are married, it's important that they're married. You know what? Just ask your parents. Ask your parents.
See everything around us, and we have to understand that, like, it came from something. If you go look at a tree, you understand that came from a seedling, and if that seedling came from a seed, and that seed came from another tree, and so when we look at everything in the created order, we know that life had to begin somewhere. And the big question is, how did it begin?
Okay, so abiogenesis, that's what he's getting at. Abiogenesis.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like he's about to say that no bacteria ever turned into a human.
Yeah, that's kind of because when he goes through, that came from a seed, and this one came, and the one before it came from a seed, and the one before that came from a seed. So where did the first seed come from? Kind of deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't take him as the crazy, over-the-top creationist, so let's see where he goes.
And when we dig into this worldview, if there is no God, it is just science and the natural order, and we ask this question long enough, the answer we get is, it's unknown. See, science and Darwinistic evolution can only explain transitions from one life form to another, and evolution itself has no explanation for how life got started in the first place.
That's accurate, and it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Because that's not what evolution is.
Exactly.
They always love to confuse evolution with abiogenesis
and all of it with the Big Bang and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
He could either go back to like abiogenesis, that's one particular route he could take, or he could go all the way back to the Big Bang, in which he describes as also evolution. So I don't know.
Yeah, but the Big Bang really doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how life began.
Well, no.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it does.
I know.
I'm saying that those are the two routes that people that talk like him generally take. It's either abiogenesis or they go all the way back to the Big Bang. It's like you guys think that a fucking rock exploded one day and then out of nowhere humans started erupting out of bacteria, and it's like no.
Well, you see, I think I sort of get why they do this, because in their mind, the world and like the entirety of the universe was created just days before all of the humans and animals were. So to them, it's all kind of like the same. They have this neat packaged explanation. So it's kind of hard for them to think that, oh, it's actually, really spread out. So when they ask where did everything come from, they sort of expect everything at one time. And I suspect that's where they get this confusion between Big Bang, evolution, abiogenesis, and whatnot.
That's possible. And I think it's also important to note that it's okay not to know shit. Like religious people, when they're talking about this, always act like, well, they don't know what happened. No, like, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang. We don't know. We don't know now. We may never, or we might, but it's fine to not know and keep seeking an answer. And I feel like because they think that because they've made up all of these answers, that makes them more legitimate. And I just completely disagree with that. Like, I'm okay with not knowing, but I mean, neurologically speaking, humans, our brains work to figure out an explanation for things. So that's why we have gods and religions and things like that, because it was early humans trying to figure out what caused things that they could not explain. They didn't understand. And so they came up with an explanation for it.
Yeah. But also, one thing I'd like to note, that we do have explanations for abiogenesis. Obviously, the origin of life would be abiogenesis, not the same as evolution. And we do have explanations or hypotheses for how abiogenesis could have happened. And as far as we can see, they are definitely possible. And with experiments in the vein of the Miller-Urey experiment, we see that it definitely is possible for inorganic matter to form organic matter and then to form like proto-life. We see that it is possible. We don't know exactly how it happened, but we can see how it happened, and there's signs too that this is how it happened.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Now, it's unknown, but it's heavily theorized, and some of these theories can get a little complicated, but one of the most widely accepted theory for how life got started on Earth is that on the surface of the Earth there were different gases in the atmosphere, and these different gases in the atmosphere came together and souped together. Some people call it a primordial soup. Nod your head if you've heard that before. In little basins, shorelines. And so all these chemicals came together in a liquid form, and then all of those chemicals somehow came together to form protein molecules, and those protein molecules came together to form a single-cell organism, and that single-cell organism started self-replicating and somehow got from the primordial soup onto the surface of the earth, and that is how life began.
I feel like,
I mean, okay, so let's go back. Let's rewind a little bit and let's go back. So basically, he thinks that the atmosphere coalesced into a single thing and then pooped onto the earth into a primordial ooze, in which then proteins started to form and self-replicate into single-celled organisms, which then grew legs and walked on land, which he incorrectly stated as coming onto the earth, the face of the earth, which they were already on the face of the earth to begin with. But I digress. I mean, I don't know. This seems like one of the worst explanations of the entire hypothesis in general.
well, when the whole RNA stuff was discovered, the whole idea of the primordial soup thing kind of
No,
went
honey,
away.
he did not say RNA. We got to
He
be
did.
specific. He said
He did.
protein.
Right, I get it.
Protein, like RNA, that's not like RNA has the biological capacity to like create proteins,
Right.
and then it like there's the whole RNA world hypothesis, which then the RNA transformed into single-celled organisms and DNA and everything
Well, so
like that.
it's evident that his knowledge is very rudimentary.
Well, I'm just trying to go off of what he says. He says proteins started replicating, and it's like proteins don't replicate.
Well, and he also says primordial soup, but that has kind of been dismissed as just like the whole idea of just a primordial soup thing has been dismissed pretty much for the most part.
What do you think, Heath? We're taking over your show, by the way.
Sorry.
Hey, no problem. There's like 2 out of 3 people here are guests, so it's okay if I'm not the one talking most of the time. It's like there's a reason, like I don't. If there's more people here, I don't have to be like on top of everything. It's fine. But I think the key word here is somehow. He said somehow this formed into whatever he said. I forgot exactly how he worded it. But that's the key. Somehow. He doesn't really know exactly how this was supposed to have happened. And I don't blame him. Not everybody sits down reading the Wikipedia article for chemical abiogenesis. But luckily, I have. And it's with the Miller-Urey experiments. First of all, it wasn't gases. It was probably all liquid. We don't. And you know what? I don't actually know. I don't know exactly what it was. But whatever. Anyway, with experiments, sort of replicating the Miller-Urey experiment. My favorite is Sidney W. Fox. His work. He, using his calculations of what was supposed to be in the early Earth, he performed a variation of the Miller-Urey experiment in which he actually formed what he called proto-proteins. And now it's not entirely clear if this is what would have been made in the early Earth, that this is how life would have formed with these proto-proteins then forming into whatever. But it's important that these things really did give lots of signs of sort of early proto-life, the precursors to life. We have seen these things, and again, there are loads of hypotheses, but Sidney W. Fox, again, I believe it was a book that he claimed that he wrote, a scientific book, but a book where he claimed that he actually also created what he called microspheres, which were sort of proto-cells. They're these little balls that would form, I believe, made of proteins, and that they would replicate using binary fission. Now, they didn't have any sort of DNA, RNA, any sort of information inside of it, but there are these just shells, I think, that would replicate with binary fission. And his hypothesis was that these sort of proto-proteins could evolve into something akin to RNA, and then eventually something akin to DNA. Somehow those got into sort of proto-cells like these to become the first cells. And that's a... and that was from a long time ago, so I don't know how many problems there are with that hypothesis. But we do understand the basics of how this sort of thing could work, and it's very plausible.
Well, yeah, and here's what's important is that we're continually studying this kind of stuff, and we're continually learning as like a species. Like, I don't study this, but like we're we're continually learning new things, and so we get a little closer to knowing for sure all the time. And I think that's what's important. And I think that's one thing that separates the scientific community from the religious one, is that they're fine with sitting on their explanations despite all of the problems with those explanations. And science really isn't.
Yeah. It's also much more complicated. Like the idea of how, sort of amino acids turned into this proto whatever, and then turned into proto something else, and then proto something else, and then it was really long, complex, until eventually we had fish that crawled onto land. That's very far off from the beginning of life, and it's also, I think it's kind of difficult for them to either comprehend that or to accept that. Maybe they think that's ridiculous. I don't really know, but they don't. But like people like this guy don't seem to have that grasp.
Well, right. That's what I meant when I said his knowledge base on this is so rudimentary that of course it doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't make sense because you clearly don't understand it. And so he's missing so much that it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. But let's see how he answers the rest of these questions. I'm sure they'll be just as good.
Of course.
Now, we'll look here in a little bit about some problems with that theory, not only statistically, but practically speaking. But it is a bit troublesome and a bit far-fetched. And so this question is kind of open. How did life begin? No one really knows. Some atheists have gone so far as to say, well, maybe more highly evolved life forms came to the surface of the earth and seeded the surface of the earth with single-cell, self-replicating organisms.
Aliens.
Oh my, pause. Yeah. Okay, so obviously he's talking about the Ben Stein documentary type thing called Expelled, where he cut up like talking to Dawkins about possible ways that life could have formed on the earth. What he's talking about is panspermia.
Yeah.
And it's not that like we think that aliens like got here. Like in the interview, I do believe that Dawkins mentions like aliens, but I think it was in a more of a like, well, we wouldn't be able to distinguish like highly advanced aliens from God or something like that. But I feel like he's meshing it into the whole idea of what panspermia is, and that's just like life or the building blocks of life being deposited here on Earth via like meteorites or something like that. I don't know of a scientist now, at least one that's not like a crank or something, that says that aliens seeded the Earth with like, sure, is that a possibility? Maybe. I mean, there's nothing to say that that's not what happened, but at the same time, it's like that is like on the like it's far more reasonable to think that like a meteorite had some kind of like RNA structures or whatnot like living on it, because we've proven that kind of material can exist on meteorites, but like what panspermia says is that they could have been deposited here via meteorites or whatnot striking the Earth, because in the early Earth you had like meteorites that were striking the surface. All that like a lot more than they are now, And so it's totally I think it's more possible that that is how life got here if it didn't originate here. I think it's way more possible that is it than like a fucking alien with a petri dish.
Yeah, but the way that he's describing this, it really reminds me of that whole "you believe nothing exploded to become everything," that sort of misunderstanding of science and then posing it in a ridiculous way. Of course, you know, the Christian audience who may not know any better, of course they're going to think, "Oh yeah, that's ridiculous." But if you do come in contact with an atheist that is scientifically minded, first off, contact your local nun. That may be an issue, but they're not going to be convinced by this sort of thing.
No, they're not going to be convinced by this kind of thing. And I think it's funny how, like, I mean, there's so much material out there which they could go and search and actually try to understand, like, the scientific hypotheses and everything. But it's like they're willfully not doing that.
Yeah.
Aliens, but okay. So that is a theory for how it happened. What's interesting is that question is really unknown.
Not.
How did life begin? It's unknown. That leads us kind of the next question, identity. Who are we?
So he said it's unknown. I wonder if that's going to become a theme here now.
As humans, how do we stand apart from the rest of the created order? And this is what atheistic thought says. Humanity is simply the most highly evolved inhabitant of the Earth's ecosystem.
So, I have a question. He asks, "What? How do we know, or what makes us stand apart from the entire rest of the ecosystem? Why do we have to stand apart from it? We are a part of it. So I don't understand why why they think we're so special."
I think
Why
he's
do we have to stand?
be more intelligent than us, like dolphins or something. But
Hey Heath.
yes.
Oh wait, sorry. The stream was offline for a second.
Yeah,
It was popping back and forth, and then it was just off for a little while. So
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
sorry to interrupt you.
yeah. There's not much I can do about that. I am recording the audio, so as a podcast, you know, this will be fine. But
gotcha.
there's not much I can do about the internet issues. Sorry for everybody watching the live stream that probably can't hear me right now.
It looks like it's back on now.
Yeah, it's
It
on
was
and
doing
off.
fine. It was doing fine for a little while, and then it went off, right back on, and then it went off for a little while. So
Yeah, well, there it goes.
the people in the chat are commenting on how God shut us down.
God put in a copyright claim.
Okay, well, yeah. My internet, man.
That's okay. We can keep going if you want.
Yeah, I will.
Happy fellow by the name of Richard Dawkins says, "We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes."
Oh, Lord.
Well, I think what he's trying to do here is to paint a very nihilistic view of atheism, which nihilism is totally different than atheism. But I mean, he's trying to put forth that atheism has no value in life, and he's really trying to paint it as just a belief system, I guess, that just doesn't believe in life or believe that we're special or something. I don't know. It seems like he's just trying to demean it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. The thing is, like, Christianity as well as other religions, they say that, you know, we were made special, you know, in the image of God. We were given dominion over other animals. So it's a definitely very religious. To think that you could definitely think that we are above other animals and separate from them, and totally separate from the rest of the ecosystem because we are given favor with a god or whatnot. So I think it could definitely be sort of uncomfortable, or maybe not very understandable to think that, oh, we're just part of this like any other animal.
Yeah, I'd like to see someone claim dominion over the other animal. They go out and get fucking bit by a shark. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a ploy at the fact that like Christianity in particular makes you feel set apart and special because we're specially created by God. But yet, I mean, it's really hard to believe that we're specially created by God when like our biological like how things evolved and how similar we are to other apes and whatnot just seems to be to the contrary of that whole notion. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always find it interesting. Like, if you question one of these guys, like, if we are made in the image of God, why do we look a lot like apes? And why are our anatomy similar to, like, every other mammal? And they'll just really... It's really funny to try to see them, like, defend that and see what keeps us separate from other apes.
Well, I mean, to be fair, in their worldview, all the animals were created by God.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also the whole explanation of, well, God just sort of copy pasted the code over, and that's why we look similar to the other apes. Like, I love it when they use that kind of explanation.
Yeah, I love the explanation. Like, his design was already perfect, so we just used it again. Yeah, but it's not. But let's continue.
So how are we different? We're more highly evolved. Nothing special. It leads us to the question of why are we here?
I guess that leads us to that question. But if
not on anybody else's logic train.
But what makes us special? Like he just said, if we're highly evolved, that would make us special in some way. You know, we have the intelligence and the ability to communicate like no other creature has. Surely that makes us special a little bit. I feel like he's just kind of downplaying that.
I think he's special.
His beard is bothering me. I feel like it's too low, and it's showing. It's really showing his shiny cheeks, just really leaving room for that. Is that? That's bothering me. Is it bothering anyone else?
No.
No. But I respect that his beard bothers you.
It was just random. I expect you to say some. I mean, I don't know what I expect you to say. Anything, but like his beard really bothers me.
It's like, I don't know. It's really low. Whatever. Okay, fine.
People have been asking this for generations upon generations upon generations. This keeps almost everyone up at night staring at the ceiling. Why am I here? What is the purpose of me being here? And Dawkins would go on to say something like this. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music.
We heard this quote in the last episode of the Back Pew. No, Sinner's Pew. I was planning on calling it the Back Pew for a long time. It's really gonna hard to get that out of my head. But is this just gonna be all Dawkins quotes? Just Dawkins says this, Dawkins says that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, to be fair, DNA doesn't care. Like, but that doesn't mean that people don't. Like, I mean, it doesn't mean that atheists don't give a shit about shit. It just means that, like, no, DNA does not have empathy.
Well, yeah, but like, I mean, I feel like Dawkins right here, what he's saying is basically reality don't give a shit about you. Like, I mean, that's what I take away from what he's saying here, because I mean, he's saying DNA just is, and it like nature is nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, and nature is indifferent. Yeah, nature is indifferent to us. I mean, if you go out into the middle of the ocean, like KC was saying earlier, you're gonna get your ass bit by a shark, and or any other bit of marine life that will kill you, because nature doesn't care. I mean, you're not in the environment that you're evolved to live in. So, I mean, I don't see why nature being indifferent to human life is some kind of argument against, like, the value of atheism, or how, or to represent how atheists value life.
I think that, like, while this quote is like, I completely agree with this. You know, what he's saying is true, but I think this is cherry picked in the way that he found a really harsh way of putting it, and you know, to present that in front of an audience of Christians who obviously don't think that this is the case, that they have a purpose, they were given a purpose, and then to have this, which is true, but put it in a relatively harsh way, it's kind of difficult for them to swallow. I think that it is a little bit of like emotional manipulation, sort of.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
Yeah.
It's the question of why are we here? We're here to survive. We're here to pass on our DNA to another generation. We're here for no other reason than survival.
Well, yeah, from an evolutionary perspective, pretty much. I mean, if you feel like you have more purpose or meaning than that, then, well, you very well do, but that's not like your evolutionary purpose. That's like your social purpose or emotional purpose.
Well, yeah, I agree with you from an evolutionary perspective, right? But I mean, I think people find their own meaning in life. I don't need an engineer. I just reading. I was reading a name on the screen.
You heard her. She doesn't need an engineer. What does that tell you?
Well, I was looking at the screen and it's got the Discord pulled up and there's somebody with, anyway. I don't need like a religion or a god or anything like that to tell me what my purpose should be. I find my own purpose. And I think that's pretty much what most of us do.
Yeah, and what he's sort of saying is that you don't really get this out of evolution, out of science. And I don't suspect that he will say, like, oh, you can give yourself your own meaning. The fact that the answer isn't that easy, I don't know. I honestly, I don't really know what he's trying to get out of this. Because, like, even if that's true, like, that doesn't mean that atheism is unreasonable or that there has to be a god. Because even if, you know, things suck, they just suck.
I agree. They do just suck.
Yeah. But, yeah.
So then the question from all of that of how should we live? Now, what's interesting about this, if we don't know how we got here, if there's nothing really special about us, and if life really has no meaning other than survival, then it would be safe to assume that how should we live, the answer to that would be any way we want, correct?
Well,
So what's interesting...
I mean, that's not the logical. I mean, those like that's a non sequitur, because I mean what it doesn't, like, the second part doesn't follow from the first part. You're just connecting the two because it works for your argument here. That's all. I mean, atheists do have their own, I guess, morality, like, individually, but I mean that's the same thing for everybody. Everybody has their own individual kind of morality that they set for themselves. You know, that's why people have the different moral codes that they do. So, I mean, even in Christianity, you have different moral codes. What one denomination feels is moral, another denomination feels is immoral. So, I mean, just because you have some kind of authority telling you what is and is not moral doesn't mean that, you know, that is the correct morality or anything like that. And it also doesn't mean that those without that authority just think that everything's free reign, you know?
Yeah. I also think that for the question of how we should live our lives, atheism nor science, they don't give us that answer. So I guess in that way it's sort of easy for him to come to the conclusion that, oh, there's no direct, straight answer, that there must be no answer, it must be whatever you want. And I guess it's sort of easy for him to say that, to make that jump, especially since that's like the Christian idea of like unbelievers anyway. They just want to do what they want. They hate God. They know God exists. They know in their heart, but they just don't want his authority. And this sort of there no being straight answer on morality or direction in life or whatever. It sort of makes it easy for him to make that jump.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is the new atheist thinkers, guys like Sam Harris, who wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, seem to suggest that you can be good without God, and that goodness and morality are simply a product of evolution. That we've evolved to such a point where we've understood that certain behaviors contribute to human flourishing and certain behaviors don't. And some people that hold on to this line of thinking, like this atheist thinker, says we find moral value to be immanent in the natural world, arising from the vulnerabilities of sentient or feeling beings and from the capacities of rational beings to recognize and to respond to those vulnerabilities and capacities in others. So that sounds nice, that somehow we've figured out through evolution that somehow being nice to the people around us and being kind and caring is best for us in a species as a whole. Now, that sounds nice, but the problem is it doesn't really line up with the rest of atheist thinking. It's a non sequitur argument.
Oh, yeah, now that's the non sequitur. Thank you very much there, Professor Fallacy.
Yeah, like, how does the... Let's see.
Well, does it really...
Sorry?
Well, I mean, okay, so he brings up Sam Harris. Sam Harris makes the argument that there are, like, you can have objective morality without a God or anything like that. But I mean, he still has the the foundation of human flourishing as like the foundation for judging whether or not something is moral or immoral. And I think that's a good foundation to start off on. I still think that it's a subjective foundation that he's starting off on, so it still makes his morality subjective, in my opinion. But I think that it's not Sam Harris's argument or anything like that that makes the case that people can be good without God. I think people can be good without God regardless of the moral stance that you take, because I mean I totally stand with is it Weinberg? Crap, I can't remember his name, but he basically said that for good people will do good things and bad people will do bad things, but for a good person to do bad things, that takes religion. And I'm heavily invested in that because I think that people align themselves to a religion or an authority based on their own internal moral systems. So to say that, oh, well, you can be good without God, I think that you're good first and then God comes later, and you just use that to justify being good. But you were already good to begin with, if that makes any kind of sense. So, I feel like it's a post hoc assertion to say that you need God to be good.
Yeah. But again, it's tough because they think in a totally different way. Because, even if their religious beliefs are justifications for what they already think is moral, they still have this idea that was given by God, that was governed by God. So it's a real... It's totally different. It's a real sharp turn to take to say that, oh, it's all pretty subjective, kind of based off of survivability, but it's not solid, not concrete, not given.
Well, I mean, it's solid and concrete and given in their worldview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really follow everything else. In fact, other classical atheist thinkers, a guy by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche, would say this about morality. He says, morality is neither rational, nor absolute, nor natural. This is not natural. If you go out in the created order and you see a lion killing a gazelle, it's not murder. It's called eating.
Well, I mean, technically murder is just the illegal killing, so no, it would not be murder for an animal to kill another animal. But I mean, like, what else do you expect a lion to eat, first of all?
Well, right. I mean, you could, if you want to be a real dick, you could be one of these fucking big game hunters that just go out and have trophy kills. I mean, that's a real dick thing to do. But if you're killing something to eat it, an animal or us, like, that's part of like the food chain. That's how life cycle works.
Well, and I mean, murder is a human construct.
Well, yes, murder, yeah,
because it's like you don't murder a cow.
I don't know. I have fucking murdered a burger before.
No, but I mean, sure, you can disagree with the killing of animals on whatever level that you like, but like I don't know. I feel like it's an entirely human construct of like one human killing another human unlawfully. So I mean, it's not an illegal killing or whatever, but morality is neither rational nor absolute nor natural. I mean, morality is an abstract concept that really only humans have. Like, I mean, like dogs and other animals in the world can exhibit different moral aspects, but like they don't understand morality like we understand morality.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, I still the version I'm talking about isn't so much, I guess, natural as if to relate to the natural world, but it is natural in the way that, you know, humans ourselves like came up with it naturally, kind of. I don't know. I feel like that's a bit of an equivocation type thing that he's kind of playing around with here.
Yeah, like I don't agree that morality is completely unnatural, and I also do think that you could rationalize morality, or at least you sort of give your own self a rational basis. Not everyone does, but you could. But yeah, I would say morality is definitely, you know, based on nature, especially within social animals like ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You see a male mammal forcibly copulate with a female mammal. It's not called rape, it's called reproduction. It's not rational and it's not absolute. He said this: the world has known many moral systems, each of which advances claim universality. But all moral systems are therefore particular, serving a specific purpose for their propagators or creators, and enforcing a certain regime that disciplines human beings for social life by narrowing our perspectives and limiting our horizons.
Really interested to what he says to this.
Now, a man by the name of Adolf Hitler would take this line
and say, of course,
for my society, what is advantageous for my people group, what is advantageous for us is to exterminate other people groups and to exterminate weaker people in our species. And hence the Holocaust is created with some sort of a rational justification following this thought.
That is not at all what atheism wants to do. Like, that's not a thing of atheism. That's so stupid.
Yeah, well, and I mean to compare like all of this to like Hitler, like to derive Hitler from what Nietzsche stated. I mean, I don't. I mean, I feel like this is the general thing of, oh, well, then that means Hitler didn't do anything. You know, like I mean, we can objectively. I think that as far as like how we understand societies now and how we understand everything, I think that we can objectively all agree that, you know, that was wrong. And objectively meaning that, like, I don't think that anybody would disagree with that was working off of the idea of like you know, human flourishing or what's best for modern society. Like, I think that we can all agree that that was just bad in general.
Yeah, but what he was talking about what Nietzsche, I don't know how to pronounce that, but what the quote was saying was that people have different sort of ideas of morality, and we sort of push that sort of onto other people, and we try to get people to like form to our idea of morality, sort of, kind of. And what preacher guy here is saying that, oh, that's kind of what the Nazis were doing. That can't be wrong, because then there would be Nazis. But the thing is, there were Nazis. There were people who think this way. You gave us a perfect example of how this actually does happen, and we've seen this before on a pretty large scale. Yeah, it's terrible, and we definitely want to avoid that sort of thing because of the morality that everyone else has. But yeah, this is a sort of consequence of this. I feel like he's arguing from consequence there, because, oh, I guessed atheists have Nazis. Yeah.
Well, that and I. Oh, go ahead, hon.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there probably were Nazis who were atheists. Like, there were also Nazis who were religious. Like, this is completely aside from your chosen religion or lack thereof.
Yeah, but I think the argument is that Christianity, or I guess his idea of the right Christianity, would give you a set of morals that you should follow, whereas anything outside of that is going without your idea of morality from your religion. But that in itself really proves the point that different people have different sets of morality, and we all want everyone to agree with us, but it's all totally different. I don't.
You sound so disgusted.
I'm just disappointed.
Mm.
I don't get how they can't see that. They say, oh, if this is how it is, then I guess Nazis would have happened because they were doing it in accordance to what you're saying. Yes, that's exactly what happened. But,
well, I mean, they say stuff like that because they need to demonize people who don't adhere to their religion. It doesn't fit their narrative.
yeah.
And they want people to be like, what's the scariest fucking thing you can think of? A Nazi? Okay, well, let's call this group of people over here Nazis and say that the reason that they killed millions of people is because they lacked religion. Like, I mean, it's their narrative. That's all it is.
I don't think the argument was necessarily a lack of religion caused Nazism. It's that subjective morality caused Nazism.
And as atheists, we can't say it was wrong or anything like that. But I think that the core of relative morality or subjective morality would lend to being able to say, well, no, they're wrong because of these reasons. And I mean, of course, those reasons are based on our subjective view of morality, but I would think that our subjective view of morality can compete with other subjective views of morality and see which ones have the best morality, you know?
Yeah, I see. But okay, let's see where else he goes with this.
We ask the question, where are we going? We all know people will die. We all know all of us will die. So the question is there something after this? Where are we going when we die? And the answer, according to Australian atheist Keith Cornish, is the simple fact is that all life forms end in death, and the elements of which they are composed return to the air and the earth to be taken up and recycled in some new organism. What happens when we die? Nothing.
I would agree.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's other than the shitting your definitely happens when you die. But I mean, but in this respect that he's talking about right here, I mean, Christians decompose just like non-Christians decompose. I don't understand the distinction he's making.
Well, what he's gonna go on to say most likely is that what comes after? Nothing. For atheists, nothing comes after, and so we're just gone. And like, how awful is that to believe? You know, like, we've got to have something. There's some reward for being a good person, because if there's no reward for being a good person, then why would you be a good person? I feel like that's kind of like the line that he's gonna roll down here in a minute.
Yeah. Let's. I agree, but let's see.
We're worm food. That's about it. Now, if this seems a little dark and we would ask the question, why would someone get to this, or why would someone fall into this? We'll answer that here in a second, but let's talk about the agnostic worldview.
Oh, well, I guess he'll get to it in a second, but like how would somebody get to this or fall into this if we have no other reason to think that anything else is after death? It wouldn't make sense to there's no reason to think of anything else, I don't think.
Well, right. And I mean, he says it's kind of dark, but like, it's just reality. I mean, not everything has fucking sun shining out of its ass. Like, you know, not everything is happy and cheery and fun. Like, that's reality. So it may seem dark, but I mean, I guess that's just because you can't really make it anything other than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and this, I think this is a bit of an argument from consequences, but because of that. But I lost my train of thought again. I'm terrible at this. I'll get better in a few months. In a few months, this podcast is gonna. It's
In
really.
a few months, it'll be perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, experience is the best way to learn how to keep things going.
Yeah.
I have found at least.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to hear our daily podcast streamed live without any editing at all. I mean, we don't edit a lot, but there are some times when I'm like, wait, what did you say? Or he'll say, what you said makes no sense. And so, you know, we have to go back. But yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
For a second. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this because if we mention the agnostic view as not really being sure of anything, this is what it says. No one can know 100% if there is a God or if there isn't a God. And since there is somehow an ethical duty not to assert claims or ideas we can't emphatically prove or disprove, we shouldn't bother trying to answer what cannot be answered. So
that's the agnostic worldview, right?
I don't know any person that considers himself to actually hold to that kind of position.
Yeah, that we shouldn't bother trying to answer what cannot be answered. I think if you're going to use the word agnostic, I think that they would not say it can't be answered. They would say they don't know if it can't be answered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to say that no one can know 100% if there is a God or if there isn't. I can agree with that, at least to a deistic God. But I mean, I feel like you can know like 99%. So, I don't know. Like you said, I don't know anybody who holds to this particular philosophy.
Essentially, the agnostic view says, hey, it takes a lot of faith to say there's a God since you can't really prove it 100%. It takes a lot of faith to say that there isn't a God since you can't really prove it to be 100%. So we're going to stay right in the middle. We're going to assume intellectual neutrality. And what's interesting is that I would argue that takes a lot of faith altogether in assuming that the question of God is not important.
Please explain.
And so kind of hanging out right on the middle, saying, I don't really want to make a decision. You already have made your decision, assuming that question isn't important. What if that question is the most important one you could possibly ever ask?
If you can't answer it, then so what? I guess important question, yeah, unanswerable. What do you expect me to do?
Because the implications are serious for every way you live. So why does someone become an atheist or an agnostic? Do they arrive at it honestly? And I would answer, yeah. They would arrive at it honestly. It wouldn't simply be one day shaking their fist at God and say, now I'm an atheist. Many people become an atheist and agnostic for intellectual reasons.
Like, I'm proud right now. I'm glad that there's a Christian out there that gets it, that understands at least a little bit just the basics of what some atheists think. He's, like I said, he's a lot more fair than a lot of other preachers that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Many people say that there's a belief in all of life is solely material. There's no supernatural. There are no angels or demons or God, or there's no fairies or pixie dust or no tooth fairy or the Easter bunny. There's none of that. The only thing there is the natural world. Science and matter. And
that would lead somebody to be an atheist. I don't think that somebody just out of the blue decides, oh yeah, there's no supernatural, now I'll be an atheist.
Right.
I don't know.
I think being an atheist is a consequence of the fact that you don't believe. Like, I don't. It's like, for me, it wasn't it wasn't something that I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna be an atheist now. It was like I was like, yeah, I don't really believe in God, and oh, that makes me an atheist. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like a decision that I was like, okay, I'm not gonna believe in God anymore.
Yeah, I feel like he's about to paint it as like atheists choose not to believe in God, but I mean, you don't really choose to not believe in God. I mean, it just like Casey was just saying. I mean, it just sort of happens, you know. I mean, you're not convinced by the argument, and you don't believe in God. It's not like a conscious choice that you have to make whether or not to believe in God.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure exactly like what he's saying here, how one's supposed to jump from, you know what, never mind.
that's the most important thing. And anything else doesn't exist. And there's another intellectual obstacle that many have to faith, and that is that religions and religious narratives altogether are contradictory, that they're inconsistent, and that they're far-fetched.
Well, I mean, yeah, your book says Methuselah lived to be 900. I believe that's far-fetched. So, I mean, there's also a number of things in the Bible that are far. I mean, you could. I mean, I wouldn't be able to list them all off because it's riddled with far-fetched things. But also, he listed that under intellectual reason, but nothing so far has been like an quote-unquote intellectual reason in which not to believe in God.
Yeah.
This Bible is far-fetched. That when we read in the book of Genesis about Noah bringing the animals on the ark, many atheists say that's very, very difficult for me to believe in that. That's a bit far-fetched. I'm not going to believe in that. What's interesting and ironic is some of the theories about how life began are a bit more far-fetched than that. But
Oh my god. Okay, here's the key difference. You can believe in far-fetched things rationally if there's enough evidence, proof, and indication that is the case. I don't see any evidence that the entire world flooded over, stayed flooded for, what was it, a month or so? I forget. And then somehow just subsided. There's not only is that far-fetched and ridiculous to think, but there's no proof of it. And there would be lots of proof of that. But the idea that we evolved from our ancestors, I guess it could be crazy if you never heard that idea, but we do have the proof of it. We do have explanations, and it's all there. There's a reason to believe in, say, evolution, abiogenesis, cosmology, and not so much with, Noah's Ark.
Right. And I again, like he was saying, that this is the intellectual reason behind it. It just because it's far-fetched. That's not an intellectual reason to like dismiss something. The intellectual reason is that we don't have evidence for it, and that like there's a lot of holes that need to be filled with explanations, like where did the water go? How did the water get here in the first place? Do you realize how many fuck tons of water you would need in order to cover the entire Earth?
Oh, way more than.
Yeah.
we'll talk about that here in a minute. But many people come to this line of thinking honestly for intellectual reasons, and they have intellectual obstacles for believing faith. Another reason that people would become an atheist or agnostic are emotional reasons. And one of the biggest is this problem of evil. If there is an all-powerful good God, why does he allow so much evil in the world? See, Christian faith says that he's all-powerful and he's all good. It makes sense if he's all-powerful, but he's not all good, because he can do something about the suffering in the world, but he won't because he's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Or he's all good, but he's not all-powerful, is that he wants to do something about the suffering in the world, but he can't because he's not all-powerful. But for him to be both, and there's still to be so much suffering, some people find that simply unbelievable, and they choose to check out altogether. And many report after.
Well, I mean, see, the Christian solution to that is just to define everything God does as good. And you oftentimes have religious people that will definitely tell you that, like, child rape, when it's ordained by God, however you can rationalize that, is a good thing. Like I've heard Christians say, oh yes, it was a good thing that kid got raped, because now that kid is doing positive things with their life or something like that. It's like, no, you can God would know how to steer somebody in a way that doesn't include getting dicked at the age of 4. I mean, it just doesn't, they just redefine what it means good as to be anything that God does or says to do. And that's how they define good.
There's also the argument that if God just made everybody do good, we wouldn't have free will. And we need that because...
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he's going into it right now, but I'm curious to see what he says.
They're going through a tragedy or experiencing suffering and choosing not to believe in God. Others would say, and this is a heartbreaking reality that I think many of us need to contemplate and think about, that it's the observance of the hypocrisy and the destructive behaviors of religious people that causes them not to believe.
I don't know if that would cause me not to believe. It would definitely make me averse to religions, but I could still believe. I can separate the idea from the actions of the people, unless, the religion teaches you to do the terrible things,
Yeah, and I get it levied at me a bit that I'm confusing the actions of religious people with what the religion teaches in general. But the way that I see it is that, see, these actions, not just any action of a religious person. Like if someone is religious and they kill somebody, I don't just immediately blame the religion for doing it. But if somebody kills another person for religious reasons, then I do blame the religion, or at least their interpretation of it. And so, like, when that particular thing happens, it just shows to me that the power that religion has over people, it allows them to do bad things and do it with a clear conscience. Like they think that it's a good thing to bully a kid into suicide because they're gay or something like that. Like they feel like bullying them just because they're different is a way to get them to turn back to Christ or something like that. However you want to interpret the Christian religion, they're doing it in order to get that person to not be gay anymore, which gay is not a bad thing to be. I mean, it's a natural thing to be. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but they use these religious reasons to treat people horribly when, they will readily make excuses for people. Like for the pastor that fucks the 16-year-old students in their classes or something like that, they'll be like, oh, well, he repented and he's taking it up with God, so he's fine.
Yeah.
This reverence that we show to religion, I think, is a major problem. And it's because of the fact that we think that religion gives people these good moral values and it makes them good people. Like, that's the problem. And that is something that the religion teaches. The religion teaches that you need God in order to know what's good and bad, or that God has written the morality on all of this. And these kind of things just don't match up with what we actually experience in reality.
Oh yeah.
They see somebody claiming a faith that has changed their life from the inside out. Yeah, Jesus saved me, bless God. Those are the same people that are the most rude, the most selfish, the most nasty people to hang around and be around. Those are people in their family that are constantly judging them and constantly deriding them and cutting them down and making them feel this big. And they say, if that's how you're going to be, I don't want to be anything like you. So I'm going to push away from the table and check out, because I don't want to believe what you believe, because look what it's turned you into.
So the rude Christian is why some people become atheists. Not because of some of the actual terrible things that religion teaches, like you said, but, you guys are being rude. I don't know.
I mean, I still think that has nothing to do with it. Like, sure, you can think that a certain group of people are rude or mean or whatever you want to say, but that just means you can just not have anything to do with them. You know what I mean? Like, that just means I don't want to be friends with you. Not Christians in general, just like if you're a particularly awful, group of people at this one church or whatever, I don't really want to be part of this anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an atheist. That's not the only answer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there would be a hell of a lot more atheists out there if this was actually a reason, because like everybody could just point to like Steven Anderson and how horrible he is, and then it's like half the country's now atheist. I just don't think that his whole hypothesis here that a lot of atheists just see horrible Christians and are like, oh nope, I guess I don't believe in God anymore. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
So as Christians, before we point our fingers and look down our noses, maybe we need to take a long look in the mirror and ask ourselves, have I contributed to this?
I think self-reflection is a good idea.
Yeah, but this is like reflection on a problem that it may not necessarily be the issue that we're talking about. I mean, I guess the rude Christian or rude Christian parents, yeah, that's definitely an issue, and you should definitely not be a terrible person. But that's not exactly why people become atheists.
No. Plus, don't be an asshole is a good general rule for anybody.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I said self-reflection's always good, but I mean, anybody. And I also think that the problem that we're discussing is vastly different from just having every single Christian like look in the mirror every day. I mean, I think that, I think that the segment of Christians out there that are the horrible Christians that he's painting, I don't think are representative of the whole in general.
Yeah.
Shame on us. Another reason that many, and I would say many in my generation, kind of the 18 to 35-year-old kind of age bracket from the conversation that I've had, I'm not 40 yet. Some people think I'm 41 because I've got all the gray area in my beard, but I'm not, okay? So 18 to 35, I'm still in that age bracket, all right? Somebody asked Corey, yeah, Josh is like 42, right? I'm like, no, he's not 42. Anyway.
As if being 42 is so fucking terrible.
I don't know. A lot of there's some people that are really shy about that.
I mean, I'm not 42, but like I'm in that same age bracket he's talking about. But at the same time, like if I was 42, that wouldn't be a big deal. It's better than the alternative, right?
And also maybe the idea that he looks older than he is, maybe that's a big deal as well. Just
maybe.
Yeah.
He's self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
Box for a second. Many claim this worldview and this line of thinking for volitional reasons. When I talk about volitional reasons, I'm talking about the will. That many people desire to live freely. But they say, I don't want my choices in life
Of
to be
course.
restricted. I don't want a list of do's and I don't want a list of no's.
Of
I don't want
course.
any God or idea of God saying you can't do this and you have to do this and this is where you have to go on the weekends and you can't do all this. And so they say, I don't want that. I want to do me. I don't want to submit to any idea of God, and so I'm going to do me and just refuse not to believe in a God. Because if you do believe in a God, when we live without a concept...
Okay, so I've seen a lot of preachers. I've been to a lot of churches that say that is the only reason why atheists are atheists, why people choose not to believe in God, because they just want to do what they want.
I mean, like a multitude of the population just go ahead and do what they want already. So I don't see that as a good reason to leave. I mean, you can all within the faith already, you can do what you want and just ask for forgiveness. I mean, regardless of how you interpret that forgiveness needs to be handled or whatnot. In the religion itself, like Jesus himself says, knock and the door shall be answered, whatever. Ask and you shall receive. So, I mean, if you ask for forgiveness from Jesus, then, I mean, you get forgiveness. I mean, however you want to interpret that, you can still interpret it in a way that, you can do whatever you want and then just ask for forgiveness later. Or, be like, well, what would Jesus do? He would definitely want me to have whatever the fuck I'm about to steal. Or I'll just ask for forgiveness later. Either one.
Yeah, in my experience, the people who are assholes like this, they just want to do whatever they want. They go out partying, drinking, blowing money, whatever. The people who are like this, who don't want restrictions on morality, they don't care about religion. I guess you would call them an apatheist. Maybe they're a Christian, maybe they're not, maybe they don't really know, but they don't care. So
right.
I don't know. At the very least, people like us, that's not what that is. That's not who you're arguing against there.
True.
Concept or belief in him, that means there's no higher power to answer to. You say I shouldn't get drunk. It says that in the Bible. What if I don't believe in the Bible? Your God says I shouldn't do sexuality this way. What if I don't believe in your God? I can do sexuality however I want because
sexuality this way, okay?
Yeah, I should be able to do the sexuality however I want.
I feel like it's Borat up there talking right. Can we do the sex now?
Is no God to tell me what to do or not to do. And while many people will say it is primarily intellectually that they don't believe, many of the times it comes down to volitionally why they don't believe. The reality is they choose not to submit, because if they understand there's a God that created them and knows best, then he might know how to live our lives better than we do. Many people don't want.
I mean, which God are we talking about here? I mean, if it's the God of the Bible, even then you have to ask, God are you talking about? Because the Old Testament God's way different than the New Testament God. I mean, the Old Testament God has soldiers taking, sexual captives and shaving their heads and keeping them locked up as a captive for a month. And then you can rape them as much as you want to. And then if you don't like them anymore, you just let them go and everything's fine.
But
is
listen,
that the morality?
But listen. Now, you're not allowed to treat them as slaves, and you can't sell them. So that seems fair, right?
Well, I'm fairly certain that the sexual slavery is slavery, and you're allowed to do that, because it's never about the consent of the woman.
No, I mean, I know, but I mean,
you can't treat them so like you can't fuck her and have her do the dishes.
Right. Right. I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right?
They don't want to serve a God, and so they choose simply not to believe in him, because if you don't believe in him, you won't have to submit to him.
That's simply not how at the very least, people who call themselves atheists or who are in community like this one, that this is not it. This is not why they choose to believe. And like I said, this guy is much fairer than most preachers that I've seen. But a lot of preachers, they'll say that that is how every non-believer thinks. That's why they're all doing it, and it's kind of annoying. And I even think that he's saying that this is why a lot of people do it, or most people choose not to believe. But it's just overblown. That's not how it is.
Right. Can you imagine applying this same logic to any other facet of life?
Right.
Like, you're driving 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone, and a cop starts turn on his light.
She gets up and calls the kids and says, something's going on with your father. Ask him how he's doing. The kids came in and said,
I
Dad,
know
how
where
are
he's
you?
going
He said,
with
I'm
this.
great. I'm just a dead man. I said, okay, that's a little weird. So they kept kind of pushing in, and he was just convinced that he was dead. He was a dead guy, and he was convinced of it regardless of any conversations they would have to the contrary. So they called the doctor. The doctor came and said, sir, how are you feeling? He said, I'm feeling great. I'm just a dead guy. Okay, so they called psychologists and psychiatrists, and they started this long, intensive therapy where they tried to convince him that he wasn't dead. And the doctor said, here's what we're going to do. We are going to convince him of a certain premise, and the premise is dead men don't bleed. Dead men don't bleed, dead men don't bleed. So they showed him pictures of skeletons and rotting corpses, and they said, dead men don't bleed. He said, oh, yes, dead men don't bleed. Those are dead men. Yes. Are they bleeding? No. Dead men don't bleed. Dead men. So he had this premise, this obvious evidence presented in front of him. And so the end of his therapy, the doctor called in the family and gathered everyone around, and they said, sir, there's a premise we have attempted to convince you of. And what is that premise? And he says, it's that dead men don't bleed. He said, very good, sir. Now watch your finger. And so he looked at his finger, and the doctor took a needle, and blood went everywhere. And the man said, well, great Scott. Some dead men do bleed after all. Other than that being a really...
I heard that before. I'm not exactly sure where is... Yeah, a lot of the stuff...
It's stupid.
Well, well, no, I mean, I feel like this... Which, the Bible is known for being filled with. This is a good parable for, how Christians actually treat things. I mean, because... like whenever you start discussing morality and everything like that, and you bring up is child rape in God's plan, or did God plan for that to happen? And then you have the ones that are like, well, I guess child rape can be good. I feel like that is this is an example of that kind of thinking, not anything to do with atheism.
Well, I think what he's trying to say is that you just can't convince them. They're not going to be convinced. There's hardly a use arguing with them. I think that's the route I've seen this taken.
Well, I mean, you're not going to convince the Christians of it either.
Right, yeah.
Good story. The point is that regardless of the evidence that you present to some people, they're going to believe what they want to believe anyway.
Exactly. They're if they're not convinced by what you're saying, it's because they just don't want to believe.
Well, yeah, but this is this argument doesn't help him, and it doesn't help atheists, because people are going to believe what they want to believe if they're not open to changing their mind. And I mean, Christians are notoriously not open for changing their minds. Things. So, I mean, this particular thing shouldn't convince anybody, because it doesn't help either side.
Right, yeah.
Regardless of how obvious the evidence is. And so as we're going through this, and we're just kind of talking about, hey, logically this doesn't add up. Someone could be confronted with the most obvious reality in front of them and still simply say in their stubborn pride, I will choose not to believe it. So we're going to look at three of...
If he's talking about the argument from mind, which he kind of alluded to earlier, with the whole seeds and everything like that, he kind of alluded to the whole grand design thing. Just because we understand why you're wrong about it doesn't mean that we're not open to changing our mind about whether or not there's a creator. Just because you present a bad argument doesn't necessarily mean we have to believe it. And just because we don't believe it doesn't mean that we're just going to believe whatever the fuck we want to.
Yeah, but after Christian argument after Christian argument fails, they're just stubborn. They're just not going to believe. You might as well just cut your losses, move on to someone else.
these today. The first is the problem with cosmology, or the cosmological problem. We talk about cosmology, what we're talking about is this idea of origins. Where did we come from? Where did life begin? And when we look at the universe and we observe everything around us, what we can see is that the universe consists of a series of events stretched across time in a long causal chain. And each one of these events is the cause of the event that comes after it and the effect of the event that comes before it.
We can see where this is going.
The world as it is came from the world as it was, which came from the world as it was before. Now, while this may seem really complicated, it's really not. You can go outside, and we talked about this earlier. You can look at a tree and say that was a seedling, and that was once a seed, and that came from another tree. Everything that we see had some sort of a cause. You can look at the squirrels in that tree and say, okay, that squirrel was a baby squirrel who was once far enough back in time. What do we find? Well, there's really only two options. And the two options are this. The first is we reach the first event in the
probably
series.
Evil with fangs.
It's like everything has a first event, but the universe has to itself have a cause that set everything going. Now, we know that to be true. That's an observable reality that you and I live in. And so that...
Do you agree with that the universe had to have a cause at the beginning that set everything going?
Well, I mean, we have the cosmic microwave background, for which we can see like the Big Bang for all intents and purposes, and I mean we don't know what happened prior to the Big Bang, and we don't know what the state of the universe was in prior to the Big Bang, or anything like that. So as far as going back to the Big Bang, as far as what set our current universe into motion, I mean, I think that we do have sufficient evidence to say that happened, but he's talking about it as if it's like an absolute beginning. And I mean, I just don't think that we have the knowledge to say, oh, absolutely, this is where it started. Like, well, this is where our current like universal state, I guess you could say, started. But we don't know what happened before that. We don't know what the state of the universe was in. I mean, we know that space-time came into existence at the Big Bang, but we don't know what it was like before then. So I mean, he's levying that he has special knowledge of what happened before that when nobody knows what happened.
Yeah,
it has to be the case for everything we see. Or there's another possibility. There is no first event in the series, and the past stretches back into infinity. Now, that second possibility, we're going to talk about that for a second. That's highly improbable, because if the universe had an infinite past, that's very problematic.
It's improbable, guys. Did you say improbable or unprobable?
Let's see.
Now, that second possibility, we're going to talk about that for a second. That's highly improbable.
Yeah, it's improbable.
Unprobable.
Highly improbable.
Highly improbable.
Well,
Unprobable isn't a word by itself, but when you add highly, then it works out.
Exactly.
I typed it into Google and it says, "Did you mean improbable?"
Yes, that's what he meant.
Yes. Yeah, but I will agree that there's a sort of beginning of the universe, and it doesn't stretch back infinitely. But at the same time, I don't think that there was like a before the Big Bang, because there was no before time. Maybe there was like a cause, but
right.
So in that respect, it doesn't go back so far that there was something before time, if that makes sense.
Right. No, and I would agree with that. And there's a lot of hypotheses out there about like what the state of the universe was in before that. But I mean, as far as like our current reality and everything goes, like as far as time goes, like time had a specific beginning.
I don't know, y'all, because I have seen the movie The Land Before Time. So saying that there's no before time, I just don't think is.
We have video evidence, okay?
Right, yeah. You found the documentary.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I would definitely agree that like time started at the Big Bang, and like that's the state of our universe. I don't want that to be like mistaken for me saying that like time goes infinitely back, but like like the state of the universe prior to like the existence of time and space. Like we don't know what that actually looks like, but there's like a lot of hypotheses. Like there's one hypothesis that's like it's like a nudge hypothesis or something like that. Like there was the it was almost like it was sitting on the precipice of something and it just needed a nudge and then it exploded or something like that. Well, no, okay, not an explosion, but it like the Big Bang happened. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's one particular one. There's also the matter and antimatter explanation of what was happening, and so I mean, there's a lot of different hypotheses out there that could equally be it. I think that like the Big Crunch kind of model, where the universe is constantly expanding and constricting, expanding and constricting. We don't know of anything that can explain how entropy can reverse itself. Like we don't have an explanation for that. So I think that is probably on the lower end of the hypotheses that could be correct. But like you just have various like levels of like what's probable to have happened prior to it. But definitely like time and space had a beginning.
Yeah. But let's learn why an infinite time back in space, even though we don't believe in it, let's learn why it's improbable.
Because if the universe had an infinite past, that's very problematic, and about as problematic as the idea that I just counted down from infinity. If the universe had an infinite past, then time would have had to count down from infinity to reach time zero, which is the present, and so we would not have reached it.
How does that follow?
He needs to not try to do maths.
Yeah, you can't. So it's his argument that if there was an infinite beginning, there was no starting point that you could start from counting down from.
Right.
Like, you kind of a little bit just brushed on the nature of an infinite number. That doesn't mean anything.
And the fact that we have reached the present therefore shows that the past is not infinite, but it is finite. We can see past, present, and future.
Okay, so time can't move if time is infinite? What?
Yeah.
I
think that's what he's saying. I mean, we're getting a really shitty science lesson right now. So.
Well, I mean, ever tried to get a science lesson from a diehard Christian? It's never really that great.
But let's get back to that other idea that there was a first cause that set everything into motion. And what's interesting is that modern science confirms that. The universe did indeed have a beginning.
Mm-hmm.
This was an event that happened, and science can confirm and see that it happened. It's called the Big Bang Theory. This is not a sitcom on CBS. This is an actual scientific theory. Now, what we see is that everything that we have around us, scientists speculate that all that started with one thing and that came into existence. Some people say exploded. It was more like an expansion that happened.
Somebody gets it. Somebody.
Jesus, I can't believe he said that. But
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how the last part of the question said, did the universe just pop into existence out of nothing?
Yeah.
No, like the universe did not explode or expand or anything, and every like trees and cars and people and shit just pop out of a point of nothing. No, that's not what anybody thinks.
Right, yeah.
The question is, what caused it? Did the universe just pop into existence out of nothing? Somehow everything we see came from out.
You were doing so well.
Yeah.
You went further than most creationists go, but you're not quite there yet. It's upsetting.
Yeah, I've never been so conflicted about a preacher in life. But so like he references a nothing that science actually doesn't use, because he's thinking of like absolute nothing, which as we know it can't really exist. And because even a vacuum with all radiation and everything stripped still has an electrical charge to it. So I mean, you know, this whole idea of nothing, I feel like it's hard for them to get over, because like I've seen it so many times where creationists will hold open their hand and be like, I got nothing in my hand, and I close it and then I open it back up and there's still nothing there. It's like, well, you technically don't have nothing in your hand. You have like your air, like air is a fluid and your hand's moving through it. So in your hand is just air. It's just the pocket of air that's in your hand. And so there's literally that, like, that's not nothing. Like that's no kind of nothing that we would define in science or anything like that. So like for him to say, oh, did it just pop out of nothing? It's like, well, if you understood like virtual particles and how things in a vacuum. What?
You expect him to understand virtual particles? He said unprobable, John. Unprobable. Of course he doesn't understand virtual particles.
Okay. But he does seem to be ignorant on like the current hypotheses as to how the expansion started.
Well, he's also ignorant to the current hypotheses on how life began on Earth. So, I mean, we'll go with ignorant in general.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, it didn't. Obviously, it didn't start with nothing. The classical traditional the idea is that it started with the initial singularity. Now I forget if there's like issues with that hypothesis or whatever. I forget. It's been a long time since I really looked into this, but that initial singularity, I believe it was quantum fluctuations that sort of set off the Big Bang. Now, I'm not going to understand what that means, but it didn't start with nothing. There was, like you said, something there. The entire universe in an extremely hot and dense state.
Absolutely nothing, and so everything came from nothing. But here's what we know, and here's what you know, here's what I know, and we all just agreed on it. For something to come into existence, there must be something else that already exists to bring it into existence.
But it never... The entirety of the universe never began to exist. It was always... It was all always there. It kind of just changed form. And like space and time definitely did begin to exist. But that came out of things that actually had a physical existence.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to get across earlier.
Yeah.
As an observable reality that we can all agree on. And the fact that the universe had a beginning, I would argue, implies that there was something that existed before that brought it into existence. Now, to me, that seems a little obvious.
No, I mean, that's a logical leap to go from, something had to be there to it was a creator. I mean, all the other creators that we've come up with in the past, being like the different religions, have all proven to be false and not real. So the probability that your creator is actually real, that you're arguing for here because you're a Christian, the probability is greater that he's actually not real. And the probability of a naturalistic explanation is so much greater that I think that we could actually just disregard the whole idea that a creator did it, because the probability of it actually being a creator is so small that it's just not going to factor into any kind of actual logical conclusion.
Yeah. And he said earlier something along the lines of, out of everything came from nothing. But that's not true. Out of everything came from everything, but in a different shape. The universe had a beginning in the sense that space and time had a beginning. But we don't need a creator because we already had everything else. And once we can get these guys to understand that it wasn't nothing before the universe, maybe they'll stop saying stuff like this. Maybe.
I feel like he is of the mindset that like the great expansion of the universe, the Big Bang or whatnot, just immediately produced planets and stuff like. Because I've heard a number of creationists say that's what the Big Bang was
Right.
like something exploded and then just all the planets and everything just immediately popped out of that. But in the early universe, I believe that it was just like helium and hydrogen and maybe some. There was a third element that was really popular in the early universe, but like that was what was like I guess created in the expansion. Like it was these very simple gases and shit. Like it wasn't like fully formed goats that were exploding out of the Big Bang. Lithium, yes, lithium. Sorry, capital H in the comments said it. Lithium. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, maybe not to you, but I would argue that that is a creator. And what's interesting is scientists and cosmologists have argued and speculated and produced new theories every year. Or maybe it was another universe that collapsed rapidly, and that's what caused ours to expand rapidly. And maybe it was something else. And new theories are entertained every single year. But to me, the one theory that is absolutely obvious that no scientist will ever entertain is this: in the beginning, there was God.
I'm sorry, is anybody else cringing over him saying theory all the time? Like,
yeah. Yeah.
those aren't scientific theories, they're hypotheses, but they're not theories.
But even so, like, we kind of hit on this a little earlier. He's like, oh, the only one that never changes is that in the beginning there was God, and acts like the fact that hypotheses change, or you know, things like that science changes as we learn more. He acts as if that is a bad thing when that's actually a very good thing, and they should probably take note.
Yeah, but he also said that the idea that there was a God is an idea that scientists would just never entertain. It's not that we just don't want to acknowledge that is an idea that's out there. There's no reason for us to believe that. There's no evidence to point to a supernatural being bringing the universe into existence. If there was something that caused the universe, we should, research that and try to figure out what that thing is based on the evidence that we have, or at least try to find the best explanation that we can. And like somebody said in the comments earlier, when you go back early enough in the universe, you find a nice hole that God fits neatly into. This is just because we...
Sorry.
Yeah, just because we don't know doesn't mean God is the best explanation.
Agreed.
Sorry, I was just going to say, this is just purely God of the Gaps
Oh, yeah.
argumentation.
Oh, yeah.
Is the first cause that set everything into motion. Now, there's another problem that we see with this line of thinking logically, and that is the teleological problem. Now, nobody really uses that word a whole lot. Teleological just means design, if something is put together and intricately designed. Now, if you and I were walking on the beach, taking a long walk on the beach.
You find a watch? Do we find a watch?
So don't get handsy. So we're walking on the beach together, and we look, and you're laughing. That hurts my feelings. So we're there. There's a watch that's washed up on the shore, and you pick up the watch,
it's a watch.
And you start looking at it, and the watch has many different parts in the watch. There's watch hands and a watch face, and there's screws, and there's hundreds
bet
of
there's a
working
watchmaker.
parts in the watch, and you look at it, and you turn it around, and you say, wow, this is a beautiful watch. I wonder who designed this watch. I mean, look how intricate it is. Look how well crafted this watch is. And I were to look at you, and I'm like...
Nothing exploded to become a watch.
No. Well, I mean, the really simple and easy retort to this is just that we don't have natural processes that produce watches. We do have natural processes that produce planets and stars and solar systems and biological systems, plants, animals, all of that. Like, we have natural explanations for all these things. And so, I mean, that's the big difference that they always kind of jump over. Like, they never want to address.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I was going to wait till he gets to the end of the watchmaker analogy to say, but the fact that we make some things like watches and art and buildings and whatever, and we make them complex, sure. That doesn't mean that everything that is complex is made by an intelligent being. You need the information that all complex things are made intelligently, and which we don't have. We have the information that some are, but it doesn't connect that everything is then.
Talking about? That's an assumption. Don't you see all the scrap metal that's been washed up by the surf? Isn't it obvious to you that the surf somehow put the watch together from the scrap metal? You would look at me like I was smoking crack.
This is an old argument, though. This is real old arguments.
Why? Because that's an absurd assumption that somehow something that intricate was designed by chance.
But, you know, at the same time, we don't... If we saw that happening in the water, or we saw, like, the mechanism of how that could work, and we saw, like, loads and loads of, like, half-formed watches that were buried before they could get finished, and we had actual evidence to support that, we could come to believe that. Even if it was ridiculous. Obviously, we don't have that proof, but we do have the proof of evolution. We do see how animals evolved. We have that proof.
Yeah, we do.
But when we look at the created order, this is what science confirms. This is a British molecular biologist by the name of Michael Denton. He says this: whether one accepts or rejects the intelligent design hypothesis, there is no avoiding the conclusion that the world looks as if it has been tailored for life. It appears to have been designed. All reality appears to be a vast, coherent, teleological whole with life and mankind as its purpose and its goal.
I have to question this person's like credentials or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that creationists can be actual like doctors and shit, but
This could also be cherry-picked, because, again, he says looks and appears, and it appears to be this. I wonder if he went on to go, but it's not, and here's why. I don't know if this is cherry-picked or not, but it can very well look like this could be designed, although it definitely looks like it could have been designed better. But you really need to look into more than just the superficial. The evidence that you have, and we don't have evidence that this was made in 6 days by a god. We don't.
well, he the person that he's quoting here does have a book called Evolution: A Theory in Crisis.
Oh Lord.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Now let's just look at the Earth, right? This is just one tiny little planet that you and I live on in this massive, massive universe. Life on Earth would not be possible if the axial tilt of the Earth were any greater or less. The Earth tilts on its axis, and if it were any greater or any less, then the seasons, as you and I know and enjoy, would not be possible. Therefore, agriculture that sustains life and gives human beings and animals food would also not be possible.
If things were different, then things would be different.
Yeah. Also, the yeah. Well, I mean.